So the first part of this new documentary series centers around Ritu Parna, an Indian trans activist, and her mother. What was it like documenting her experience?
When I mentioned the start of the series in 2016, that focused mainly on South Asian diaspora. So these were all South Asian Americans. It turned out mostly Indian Americans at that point. Through one of the participants in the film, who was a Delhi-based graduate student who was living in the US at that time, met his partner, the Indian American gay male, in DC. I got connected to both the Indian queer community as well as the parent advocacy that was happening in India at that time. In 2018, there was a pivotal moment in the history of the queer movement in India. Till that point, queer people had been criminalized. So there was a British colonial law that had been put on the books in 1877. It's become notoriously known as Section 377. And it was a law that wasn't used to jail anyone. There were no cases for people who are queer, because how are you going to jail somebody for being queer, right? Mm-hmm. There was used for harassment. People were intimidated, people were threatened by the police, and there was extortion, and there was general social harassment going on. 2018 changed that. The Supreme Court struck down that 100-year-old, 100-odd-year-old law, and made a very, very heart-warming kind of a gesture towards the queer community by apologizing to it. So this is coming from the apex court in the country. Obviously, the rest of the country is far behind this point of view, sure, but it meant a lot to signal that the law considered them equal. And that triggered a series of queer advocacy events, with the visibility of queer people, pride parades in small cities in India. So I started thinking, my story has multiple aspects. I can tell the story of the queer diaspora in the US, but there's also interesting stuff happening in India. And since I had strong connections with the country, that brought my attention to some of the films that could potentially be made there. And so Ritu Parna was one of the people that I was put in contact with as I started researching, again, publicly speaking and visible queer people in India, because it still remains a fraught space in India. For most queer people, even if they are out in safe spaces, they'll be afraid of being visible or seen in social media and other spaces. So I would say that search was probably more difficult than finding my participants in the US.